Carrie Wimberly. I'm the Executive Director of the Addiction Prevention Coalition. We are a nonprofit in Birmingham, Alabama, and we are working. This is a part of a series, Why Won't They Stop? A family support series that has been running since the first of the year. And we have 2 more trainings after this. So we've had just about a training a month. And the beautiful thing is that each one of these trainings is being put on by a different organization. So we love that because we both want to provide education in this family support series, but we also love highlighting organizations that are working in the field so that they can be introduced and you guys can know more about them and the services that they offer, education around resources and, material is 2 of our very favorite things. So tonight we are being taught by the Drug Education Council, and I want to turn it over to Virginia Guy, who has turned into not just a fellow leader, but a very dear friend of mine. And we spend a lot of time talking and collaborating and working together and looking for opportunities to do that. And I have tremendous respect for Virginia. She has worked in this field longer than anybody, I think, and I rely on her wisdom and her experience. So welcome, Virginia and Drug Education Council, and we so much appreciate what you guys do day in and day out, and we're thrilled to have you here tonight to educate us about vaping and addiction.
Thank you, Karen. I can't tell you what an honor it is to partner for all of these workshops, and this one especially. I think this topic, smokescreen, vaping, and addiction, is so important for our young people. The Drug Education Council is a nonprofit. We are located in South Alabama, and we serve 8 counties in South Alabama with direct program services. So we do prevention, intervention, and recovery support. So we are honored to partner with Not One More out of Huntsville and Addiction Prevention Coalition out of Birmingham and the other partners that have joined us throughout these workshops. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. We have tonight the Clinical Director of the Drug Education Council, Gail Hooper, along with Allison Covington, who is an LPC in private practice with the Alabama Primary Counseling Group. And I will let both of them say more about themselves if they want to, but they are also good friends of mine. And, it's an honor to work with them. So I think tonight is going to be a really good workshop. I look forward to it. And I appreciate everybody. We've got, a great group on tonight. And so I really appreciate everybody giving the evening to us tonight. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gail Hooper, and I'm the Clinical Director for the Drug Education Council. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our topic tonight, like Virginia said, is vaping and addiction, and we'll be focusing on how these impact young people. I'll share a little bit of information with you first about addiction, and then Allison and I will talk a little more about addiction and how it impacts young people. We'd love to have questions from you guys, so if there's something you want to ask, please put it in the question and answer or the chat, and we'll get to those at the end. But let's go ahead and get started. And let me take just a second here to share my screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, great. Okay. Here at the Drug Education Council, we've had a lot of opportunities to work with families impacted by addiction. And, one of the things that we try to do is to educate family members about addiction and about the consequences of drug use. And a lot of times they have questions. They want to know things like, where did it all start, or how did it begin? And they want to know, was there anything that we could have done to intervene earlier? And so I thought that would be a really good place for us to start tonight, is to look at where does addiction begin? And then to go from that into the vaping and then more about addiction. We know that for a lot of people, addiction does begin in the adolescent years. Research shows us that probably 90% of people who are addicted report that they actually started using during their teenage years. That's a big concern. That's a huge concern because we know that your brain is not fully developed until somewhere in your mid-20s. So because your brain is not developed, these drugs that they're using have a much greater impact on an adolescent brain than they do on a fully developed adult brain, making them more at risk for addiction. We also know that nearly half of American students, high school students, now tell us that they smoke, drink, or use other drugs in the past year. And this is a huge concern as well, because that's a lot of young people that are out there making decisions that are putting them more at risk for addiction. So what are the drugs that are most often used by these young people? These are the drugs that we call gateway drugs. And some of you have probably heard this word used before. These are just the drugs that young people use first. These are the ones they experiment with. And there are 4 different kinds of drugs that we consider to be gateway drugs. It's alcohol, prescription drugs, marijuana, tobacco, and we've actually, in the last few years, had to add vape products to that list as well. These are the drugs that young people think are the least harmful. Sometimes they think that they're not harmful at all. These are the ones that they think are less risky. And so there's not a lot of fear about what will happen to them if they use these drugs. These are also the ones that are usually the easiest for them to get access to. So for young people, they a lot of times will experiment with these drugs first. And, there are some kids that will try these drugs, and maybe they don't like the way that it makes them feel, or maybe they don't like the negative consequences that they experience, and so they'll stop using. But unfortunately, for a lot of young people, that's just not the case. Sometimes they go on to use these drugs for quite a while. And over a period of time, their body actually develops a tolerance to the drugs. And at that point, they just don't get the same effect that they did in the beginning. And what we've seen is that for some young people, when they get to that point, they start to look around for other drugs to experiment with. And maybe those drugs that were scary or frightening in the beginning don't seem as scary anymore. And so that's why we call these gateway drugs, because they can lead to other drug use later on. But even if they don't go on to use other drugs, these drugs on their own are harmful and dangerous and very risky for our young people. I said that we have just had to add vape products in the last few years to this list. And I want to talk a little bit about how that came to be. In the beginning, e-cigarettes were introduced and marketed to adult smokers. They looked a lot like regular cigarettes, and they were designed with the idea that people could use them and they could gradually reduce the amount of nicotine that they consumed until they got to the point where they could quit using completely. And that was in the beginning. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. Now, some of the e-cigarette and vape products don't even look like regular cigarettes. They look a lot more like a high-tech device than they do a smoking device. For example, let's say that you walked into your teenager's room and you saw some school supplies on their desk. If you were looking at this collection of school supplies, you might not notice that some of these are actually vape products. They look so much like flash drives and other tech devices that they often get overlooked. And that's a big part of the appeal for teens, is because they're easy to conceal. In fact, a lot of times they're hiding these things in plain sight. But these are the ones that are actually vape products. And these look like flash drives or like other tech devices a lot of times. And so parents may not notice it, teachers may not notice it, other adults may not even realize that these are there and that they're being used. We can blame at least part of that on this device. The Juul was invented in 2015. There were two Stanford University marketing graduates who decided that, and they had this great idea that they wanted to change the way that e-cigarettes looked. They wanted to create something that was sleek and attractive, that looked more like a flash drive. They wanted something with a rechargeable battery, and they wanted pre-filled pods. They didn't want to fool around with having to refill their own flavors and things into the pods they were using. So they developed the Juul, and very quickly became very popular with young people. As a matter of fact, by 3 years later, by 2018, they had already taken over the market with young people. It was the most popular brand among young people. And they had also increased the amount of nicotine that was present in the Juuls, so that each one actually contained the same amount of nicotine as a pack of cigarettes. You may have seen in the last week or so that things are maybe not going so well for Juul right now. The FDA actually ordered them to stop selling their products. They said that because they were denying their application to stay on the market because they had not proven that their products were safe for consumers. Well, of course, immediately Juul turned around and filed an order with the court to block the ban, and the court did grant them a stay. So for now, temporarily at least, they can keep their products on the market while they appeal the decision of the FDA. But even though taking Juul off the market would actually be a step in the right direction, it still would not completely solve the problem. Because here's the thing, young people have already switched to other products. Juul is no longer the most popular product with teenagers and young adults. These are the ones that are the most popular now. They've moved on to these disposable vapes. These are pre-charged, pre-filled. They're designed for one-time use. They come in lots of different flavors that appeal to kids, things like fruit flavors and all kinds of other flavors that are appealing. They cost a lot less than some of the other earlier vape products. In fact, I was looking today, and you can actually purchase some of these for as little as $5 or $6 online. And they come in various sizes. Some of the smaller sizes have as much nicotine as 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes, but they actually sell some of the larger devices that contain as much nicotine as 25 or 35 packs of cigarettes. That's a lot of nicotine. And right now, Puff Bar is the most used brand among young people. But it's not the only one by any means. There are now over 7,700 plus flavors, and there's over 460 brands of e-cigarettes. And it grows every day. And here's our biggest concern. These are no longer being marketed to adults as a way to stop smoking. These are being marketed to our young people. You can see, if you look here, you see candy flavors, fruit flavors, lots of bright colors. These are very appealing to teenagers. They're also being marketed using some of the same tactics that the tobacco companies used years ago to market cigarettes to young people. A lot of you may remember some of the things that they were doing to attract young people to smoking. The e-cigarette companies are just copying their tactics and reusing them. They're using models that look young. Some of them look very young. They're attractive. They always look like they're having fun. They're using humor, cartoons, memes, celebrities, and social media influencers. And in fact, the large majority of the advertising is actually being done on social media, which is where, as we all know, that's where kids spend a great deal of their time. They're using these social media influencers to convince these kids that this is something that they should be doing. For example, I'll show you some examples of some cigarette ads compared to some of the current e-cigarette and vape product ads. You'll see that some of the themes are the same. Some of the pictures are very similar. So instead of creating brand new marketing tactics, they just recycled some of the old ones. And when our young people see these messages over and over again, they get the idea that vaping is cool, it's glamorous, it's lots of fun, that if they want to be popular and if they want to fit in, that that's what they should be doing. The other thing that they do is they market lots of ways for young people to conceal what they're doing, because that's part of the appeal also. And there's actually products like this one. This is actually a watch, and it's a functioning watch, but it's also a vape device. It looks a lot like an Apple Watch. In fact, if you saw someone wearing it, you might not have any idea that this was actually a vape device. They also, of course, have a whole line of accessories, things like clothing designed to help kids conceal what they're doing. The young lady in the hoodie, for example, the drawstring on the hoodie is designed to conceal a vape product so that she can conceal what she's doing. They also have jewelry and things like phone accessories, all kinds of things that just add to the appeal for our young people. They make these things seem more and more like a tech device than a smoking device. So how many young people are actually out there using these products? Well, we know that these products have been the most commonly used tobacco products in our country since 2014. And currently, about 1 in 5 high school students and about 1 out of every 20 middle school students report that they've used these products in the past 30 days. And even more alarming is that out of those kids that are using, about almost a fourth of the high school students and almost a tenth of the middle school students that use vape products report that they use these on a daily basis. And it's not uncommon. We talk to students in schools, and we hear sometimes that these kids are using multiple vape products in a day. They're going through not just one product, but they're going through multiples just in one day. So that's a lot of nicotine that's being consumed. One of our biggest concerns is that we are possibly raising a generation that's addicted to nicotine. I said earlier that the early e-cigarettes were introduced as a way to stop smoking, but that's not the case with these young smokers. In fact, it's doing just the opposite. Among young e-cigarette users that are in that 18 to 24 age group, nearly half of them had never smoked traditional cigarettes before they started smoking e-cigarettes. And for young people who use cigarettes, they're much more likely than their peers to start smoking regular cigarettes just within 1 year. So all of this evidence tells us that these products are not acting as a way to quit smoking. They're acting as an introduction to smoking for our young people. So why are they doing it? What are the reasons why our young people are vaping? Well, they tell us that it's things like to experiment. They're curious. They've heard about it from friends, or they've seen it on social media, and they want to find out what it's like for themselves. Some of them also try it because they think it tastes good. I mentioned the flavors earlier. They like the flavors, and they continue to do it because they like the way it tastes. Some of them say that they do it because it's a way to socialize or to have fun with their friends. And then there are those who use because it's a way to deal with stress or to relax. And what do they think is in the products that they're smoking? That's a very big concern for us as well, because we know that if they don't have information about what's actually in it, they're not going to make the best decisions. So a lot of them think, for example, or they'll say that they don't know what's in the products. They just have no clue. But what's even more concerning is that 66% of them think that it's just flavoring and water. They think that there's nothing harmful in it, that it's just things that are safe and harmless. So what exactly is in these products? First of all, there is no water in e-juice. It's all chemicals. It's things like propylene glycol and vegetable glycerin. There are chemicals with a different concentration of flavors, and most of them have either nicotine or THC, but there's no water. It's all chemicals. And e-cigarettes produce an aerosol, not a vapor. that's a misconception. Vapor is actually 100% liquid, and the aerosol that's produced by these products actually has tiny bits of solids in it. And this is what's in that aerosol that's inhaled into their lungs. It's all these things like cancer-causing chemicals, heavy metals, flavorings, nicotine, and all kinds of other harmful compounds. All of these things are being inhaled into their lungs and into their respiratory system. And when we look at these ingredients, they're all, considered generally recognized as safe by the FDA, but that only applies when those are consumed in food. And these things take on a completely different properties when they're heated. And we actually don't know very much about what the effect is of these ingredients when they're inhaled into the lungs. For example, propylene glycol, it's actually used in the production of plastics and in food processing. It's actually a form of antifreeze. In fact, I've been told that it's the chemical that they use when you see them spraying things on the airplane wings during the cold weather to keep them from icing. That's actually a form of propylene glycol. We talked about the flavors that are present. There's one called diacetyl, and it's a chemical that's used to give flavoring to foods and to the juice that they're smoking. And it's actually been linked to a condition called popcorn lung. Popcorn lung is a condition where there's tremendous scarring in the lung tissue. And, it's one of those things that there's no cure for it. There's no way to reverse it once it happens. It's permanent. And all they can do is treat the symptoms. And the symptoms are pretty severe. It's actually pretty similar to COPD. It causes chronic cough and shortness of breath and wheezing. I mean, that's just because of one of the chemicals that's present. There was actually a study done by Johns Hopkins that found that there were actually chemicals that were, or metals that were present in the heating coils that were also being found in the aerosol, and they were being found at dangerous levels. And in fact, these were toxic chemicals, toxic metals, when they were inhaled. So when we look at a list of what are the chemicals that are actually found in these aerosols, they're very similar actually to the chemicals found in traditional cigarettes. All of these have been found in e-cigarette and pod-based aerosols, all of these chemicals. The ones that are in orange are the ones that the FDA says are harmful and potentially harmful substances. This is a list of things that they know to be harmful, and these are present in that aerosol. So how are they doing that? Why are they able to do that? Because there's currently no FDA oversight of the manufacturing of these products. There's actually no one monitoring what they're putting into it, how safe they are, or even there's no labeling or anything required to show what's actually in the vapor or the aerosol. We mentioned also that nicotine was present, nicotine and THC, and those are our big concerns as well. We know that nicotine can interfere with brain development. It actually makes it harder for young people to concentrate, to learn, or control their impulses. And we know that nicotine is a highly addictive drug. It also can increase the risk for other drug use later on. It's a stimulant, a powerful stimulant, and it actually can affect your respiratory system, your nervous system, your cardiovascular system, lots of different systems in your body. The THC is another concern. It's the psychoactive compound in marijuana. And, according to the CDC, some of the negative effects are things like interferes with memory and learning. It can impair your reaction time and coordination. It compromises our young people's ability to think critically and to solve problems. And they also warn that it can increase the risk for mental health issues, things like depression and anxiety. And there are large percentages of our middle and high school students that report that they're actually using or are vaping marijuana. Nationally, they report that about 8% of eighth graders 19% of 10th graders and about 22% of 12th graders have used these products in the past 30 days. And, those are national numbers. Here locally, we've actually, in our area, we've had reports of elementary school students that are using marijuana vape products. Kids as young as 8, 9, 10 years old that are vaping these products and putting all of these dangerous chemicals and the THC into their system. So, the bottom line, is it safe? Well, according to the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, it's not. They have a whole list of things that they say are reasons why they consider it not to be safe. Things like exposure to nicotine and other toxic substances. They talk about dependence and smoking risk, all of these things that, according to them, makes vaping not a safe thing to do. The American College of Cardiology says that there are 3 health risks to vaping. People who vape are 34% more likely to have a heart attack, 25% more likely to have coronary disease, and 55% more likely to struggle with depression or anxiety. So, I guess the takeaway is, vaping increases the risk of these conditions that we know are traditionally associated with smoking, but they also have a whole separate, unique set of threats that they pose as well. One of those threats is, the lung illness that we heard about several years ago. And as of February 2020, there were nearly 3,000 confirmed cases of lung illness from all across the country. There were at least 68 deaths. And then in February 2020, they actually stopped reporting on these because of COVID. So, they could still be happening. We just don't know. But 52% of these cases actually involve people 24 years old or younger. And the people reported that they were actually using different combinations of products. Some of them were using just nicotine-based products. Some were using just THC-based products, and some were using both. So it wasn't just one or the other. Sometimes it was a combination of things. And, they did some searching or some investigating, and they did find that the additive vitamin E acetate maybe could be linked to some of the cases, but they never really were able to definitively determine that it was the single cause of the condition. It may have been a cause of some of it, but they weren't ever able to say for sure that it was the only cause. There were lots of serious symptoms as a result of this condition. And there were a lot of young people who ended up hospitalized, intubated. There were people who ended up needing to have lung transplants. Some of them were very young people. We actually had pulmonary doctors in our area who were telling us that they had never seen anything like it before, that they had 16 and 17-year-olds that they were seeing that were had severe long-term damage to their lungs. And, this was just not comparable to anything else that they had ever seen before in their practice. And it was all because of vaping. As a result of these things, the CDC came out with a warning and said things like youth and young adults and pregnant women should not use these products. They said that there was no real conclusive proof about whether these products were helpful with quitting smoking. The Surgeon General released an advisory. The American Lung Association said they warned that there was irreversible lung disease associated with e-cigarette use. And they were warning people not to use these products at all. These are just some of the headlines from the last couple of years about some of the things that were happening across the country with teenagers who were vaping and young people. There were 16 and 17-year-olds that were having lung transplants or double lung transplants. There were young people who had lungs that looked like they were 70 years old. All kinds of things that were happening based just on the vaping. And, the long-term consequences of vaping are something that we just don't know. At this point, these products are still so new. There just has not really been a lot of time to research what the long-term consequences will be. And the the scary thing about that is that our young people, the ones that are out there now using these products, they're the guinea pigs, they're the lab rats. They're the ones that the scientists and doctors will be studying for the next 20, 30, 40 years to try to determine what are the long-term consequences. So that's why it's so important for us to get the message out to them that this is not something that's harmless. It's not something that is not risky. It has a whole set of risks associated with it. And everything that we can do to educate our young people can help them to make better choices about all of these kinds of products. Now that I've shared some information with you about addiction, about vaping, we'd like to focus a little bit more on addiction. And I mentioned briefly in the introduction that that addiction begins for a lot of people during the teen years, but there's just so much more that parents need to know about addiction. And Allison, I know that you've worked with a lot of families dealing with addiction. So what are some of the things that you think are important for us to know about addiction and how it impacts young people? And I know there was a slide that you wanted me to share, so there we go.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I think there are many things about addiction that are important for parents. And I want to use this slide to hit on some primary points, and we're going to have some question and answer time. What we know about addiction is that it's been said that it is a pediatric illness, that it develops in adolescence. Most people that have an addiction in adulthood began their use very early in their teen years. And what we know is that it is a brain disease from the standpoint that it changes the brain's chemistry. It changes the way that person who uses, once they put that substance in their body, it changes the parts of the brain, the way that their brain functions and provides messages within their system. It changes the way they experience emotions, the way their memory is impaired. It affects the prefrontal cortex, which prevents them from being able to learn from and make healthy choices and stop impulses. So it is a chemical change in the brain. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that when someone develops an addiction, there is a loss of control. And that happens more specifically faster for some drugs than others. And over time, that person loses the ability to control. And it's a primary illness, and it's not caused by something else. The genetic part of this is very important. There is a genetic predisposition for substance abuse. If I have a parent or both of my parents who have an addiction, one to alcohol and maybe one to prescription drugs, then my child would have a greater chance of becoming addicted. It makes them more prone to addiction. So as parents, it's very important for us to, if we know that information is true for our families, to help our kids understand that there is a genetic predisposition, that illness may be there, and all it takes is for that substance to enter into their body and for them to experience the changes for addiction. The primary symptom of this illness is denial. Every person who becomes addicted, and even through the process of use, abuse to addiction, that person will deny it. That person will minimize it. That person will say, I don't drink, or I don't smoke marijuana, or I don't take any more pills than anybody else. So they will always deny that, and then they will begin to try to protect that use. And the number one goal that I have learned over 34 years of working in this field is that the number one goal is to protect that addiction. When someone creates that level of use to where there is a compulsion and an obsession to use, then they lose the ability to choose that use. And it happens and there's this imaginary line, and it happens over time. So a loss of control means I cannot stop using once I start. If I drink a beer, I'm going to drink 6. That I've lost the ability to control and predict how long I'm going to drink or how much I'm going to drink. So then I may have a physical dependence on that substance where my tolerance is developed. It takes more of that substance to get me the buzz that I might be looking for. The psychological component is the obsessive part, the part in my brain where I'm thinking. My memory pathway is so strong with my hippocampus about my experience of that use, because the pleasure center of my brain dumped all of this dopamine when I use that substance. And then all I think about is that memory of what that felt like. And so I begin to be obsessive and think in my thoughts about that use, or trying to figure out how I can get that substance again, or how I can get away with it, how I can get around my responsibilities so that I can be able to get away with using. So it's really important to recognize that loss of control, the two components of that, physical and psychological. Those are two primary components of addiction. And then that compulsive behavior. And that's when we see people that do something that it's hard for an average person to understand. Like, why would they drink and drive after they've already received a DUI? Why would my teenager sneak out of the house to use again when they've been on restriction for 3 weeks because of an alcohol related incident? It's that continued compulsive drug seeking behavior, and then that use despite negative consequences, that no matter how bad things might get, that use and that desire and that motivation to use still exists. And so even though those consequences begin to stack up, it's hard for me to get out of that because the brain change has occurred. So, and then lastly, I think the thing that I want to make sure everyone knows is that this is an illness that people relapse on. There may be a period of time that a teenager says, I'm going to stop smoking marijuana, and I make a commitment and I'm going to do that. And they may not smoke for 2 months. And then they may end up smoking one night, and then it's not long before they go back to smoking what they had originally been smoking. Because once addiction is in place, it is a chronic illness. It's there. I may switch drugs, I may quit marijuana use, and I may drink instead. But that addiction is still present. So it's chronic, and it's chronic, and it's progressive from the standpoint, progressive of how much and how often and how important it becomes, and that I have a value. Once my values change, that it becomes the priority for me, then that can become progressive. It becomes progressive in nature of consequences, as well as how important that becomes for me. And then, of course, we hear on the news all the time of the fatality related to addiction. We have overdoses on heroin. We have people that are drinking and driving and die fatally in an accident. And so this illness is chronic, progressive, and sadly often fatal. So I'm hoping that was helpful to y'all. And then I know, Gail, we have some questions that have been presented as well.
You talked about progression, and I think that it's hard to understand sometimes, how does that progress in teenagers? How does it go from just experimental use in the beginning into something that is much more concerning, like addiction?
Okay. Sometimes it happens quickly and sometimes it happens slowly. There are stages of that initial use to abuse and then to addiction. And if we look at adolescents, when they use, because of the nature of their brain still developing, they experience a greater level of I'm going to call it a dopamine dump. When I use that substance, if I drink or if I smoke marijuana or if I take a Xanax, I experience a dump of dopamine in my brain that taps into the pleasure center of my brain, and it makes me feel fantastic. It is a euphoria. It is a relaxation. It is a removal of any and all stress that I might experience. And so I end up experiencing that. And then because the changes in the brain happen very fast with substances, I want to go back and find that. So I will go back and use that again because I want that feeling again. And because of the damage to the brain with regard to the hippocampus, that's where all of our memories are stored. So I have a memory pathway in my brain that says that experience of smoking marijuana was so powerful, or that experience of Xanax was so powerful that I want to go back to that. So over time, the brain change occurs. I also begin to, my behavior changes. And sometimes if people don't intervene or hold me accountable, or I don't experience consequences, then that continues to give me permission to continue to use. So there are a lot of combinations about how that happens.
What are some of the things that put people, young people, more at risk for addiction? Are there things that maybe parents need to keep an eye out for that would make their kids more at risk?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things is the age of their first use. So if someone drinks at an early age, or they try marijuana or begin vaping, like you mentioned, some of the kids that were smoking or vaping in early elementary school, the age of first use begins that brain change and puts them at greater risk for abuse and addiction down the road. So I would be really looking at the prevention and holding kids accountable and making very clear rules about that. I think family history, all of the research shows us that family history is a risk factor as well. And again, making sure that we communicate those risk factors to our kids. I think another big one is our parental messages. What are the rules in our household? What are the messages that we give to our kids about substance use? Do we allow them? Do we say, well, if you're going to drink, I'd rather you drink at home? And I hear, in all my years of working with parents, I hear parents talk about that. And that's a very dangerous setup, because that's assuming that our kids have the prefrontal cortex development to be able to say, well, mom and dad say I can drink here. It's illegal, but I don't I can get away with drinking at home because they've given me permission, but I don't have the prefrontal cortex development to be able to go out and say, well, I've got to obey other laws. So therefore, I may continue to break laws because I have experienced that message from my parents. It's also, I think, if we view marijuana today, with all of the information about legalization and some of the states that have that, if we view marijuana in the same way as we know it to have been 20 or 30 years ago with regard to THC content, it's the marijuana today is a whole lot stronger. I've worked with lots of parents that have said, well, at least they're not using hard drugs. Well, to me, that is a risk factor for addiction if my view as a parent is that smoking marijuana is okay because it's not a hard drug, at least it's not cocaine. So other risk factors, I think, include stress and trauma and low self-esteem, not having support systems in place. All of those can add to that risk factor.
On the other end of that, what are some things that are protective factors? What are some things that make it less likely that our kids will use?
Well, I think that every parent that is on this call, you are here because you are wanting to figure out what are the things that I can do. And I just really commend you for that. So one of the best things is to have educated parents, informed parents, family structure, have a level of supervision that we know where our kids are, we know what they're doing, we know who their friends are, we talk to our teens, having that open line of communication and asking them and providing them with information. There have been studies that identify the resiliency of kids if they have at least one strong connection with an adult that they respect and admire, that we don't ever need to underestimate how important that is. I think coping skills, teaching our kids coping skills, frustration tolerance, ways to deal with conflict, ways to deal with our emotions in healthy ways, accessing counseling and assistance from places like the Drug Education Council, agencies that provide us with information on parenting, all of that. I'm a strong believer that we as parents need to lock up all prescription medications, and we need to be sure to, and over-the-counter medications. A lot of the early stages of use, kids will experiment with cough medicine and Benadryl and DXM and all of those things. And so locking up those things are very important. And just having involvement in other activities, sports, religious activities, community activities, service work, family systems, like extended families, a place where kids feel connected and that they belong and that they're held accountable. I think all of those are, that may have been longer than you wanted me to say, but it's a great thing. And I think the other thing that I would say as parents, a protective factor is when we hold our kids accountable, that they have to have consequences for their choices. If they make decisions that are unhealthy or high risk, that we hold them accountable and we let them experience the consequences, that we not enable them for that. And we don't make excuses for that.
So ladies, there's a couple of questions about
Okay.
marijuana. And so I always like to take advantage of webinars like this to do education around marijuana, because some of the parents, may still think about marijuana that was present in their teen years, and the marijuana today with the vaping and the dabbing is such a different situation. And gateway drug or not gateway drug, can y'all educate us just a little bit about marijuana, or do you want to?
Oh, I could talk for 5 days about marijuana. I believe in my work, and what the research says is that the marijuana of today, the percentage of THC in marijuana is so much greater. What we had 20 or 30 years ago is at like 4% THC. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the psychoactive substance. That's the addictive substance that's present in marijuana. And what we know now, we are seeing some of the marijuana is 30, 40, 50, 60%. And when you get into some of the dabs, some of the other forms. They're much more highly concentrated, so therefore the addictive potential is far greater. Marijuana changes the structure of the brain in motivation and goal setting, all of the things that we want for our kids. It really robs them, and it's a very sneaky drug. It's that happens over a slow period of time sometimes. And so I think some of the other things are that we have changed the way our teenagers are viewing marijuana. And we have to go back to what the science tells us about that. The science says that it is a gateway drug, that it leads to other substances, that it increases, mental health issues. It certainly, there's a strong connection between anxiety and depression and use of marijuana. There is a strong connection to schizophrenia and other mental health issues in marijuana. And that is even, okay, I'm sorry about that. And I think that sometimes goes unnoticed and unrecognized how serious that is, that it is connected to so many mental health problems. So, Gail, I'm going to let you jump in.
I was just going to say that I echoed what you said. I know that we see quite a few young people who are having issues with marijuana. And, I agree, it is a very sneaky drug. I think sometimes kids and adults think that it's not as dangerous because it doesn't necessarily kill people outright. But a lot of what it does is to take away people's motivation, their desire to achieve things. A lot of the young people that we see that are having problems with marijuana, they're content to just kind of drift or float. They're not really motivated to get out there and achieve all of the things that they're capable of. And, that's just such a loss for all of us when all of these bright young people with their whole wonderful future ahead of them, they're not reaching their capabilities. They're not doing what they're capable of doing a lot of times because they are, they're content to just float around on the marijuana. So, I do believe that for some people it can lead to other drug use. That's the thing to me about gateway drugs is that it doesn't always lead to other drug use. There are some people who will use these drugs, like I said earlier, for a while, and then, they may decide they don't like it or it's causing too many negative consequences, and so they stop. Mm-hmm. But for other people, it is an introduction to other drugs. And, I've had quite a few young people tell me that they do things when they're under the influence of marijuana that they normally would not do. So it reduces their inhibitions and it leads them to make sometimes very risky choices about other drugs. If they're in a situation where someone offers them something else and, they may not have the same thought pattern and be able to resist those choices as well. So, those are just things that I think parents need to think about.
Okay, we have Amy has her hand raised. So let me see if Amy, I think you can talk now if you want to ask your question. Amy, you have a question? Okay, so Amy's not there. All right, and one other thing that, I know we always want to talk about when we have parents on the line is just the influx of fentanyl that is showing up even in vapes that are in high school, and the pills that kids can buy on social media. So, well, wait. Oh, she didn't mean to raise her hand. Sorry, Amy. All good. So can y'all just brief us on that so that we know more about that?
It is a big concern. Obviously, with it showing up in all sorts of different forms now, it's a thing that I think all parents need to be aware of, and they need to talk to their kids about the fact that even something that looks as safe as a prescription pill may not be very safe. It may actually have fentanyl or something else in it that they don't know about. So I think it's definitely something that we need to be talking to our young people about.
And I think one of the important things to know is that those pills, there are pill presses, and there are a lot of people. I mean, we've got to remember that the people that are creating and making drugs, their goal is not for health and safety. None of this is FDA approved. None of this is looking at the appropriate level of what might be in something that would not be detrimental. So the people that are doing this, the goal is money. They're making money, but there are pill presses, and there are people all over in the whole United States and outside of the United States that are making pills that look just like other pills. They may look like Tylenol. They may look like a Xanax. They may look like, with the stamp, with the crest of that pharmaceutical company and everything. It may look like an Adderall. It may look like any other form of medication for ADD. And what they're doing is it could be fentanyl, and it could be some other heroin. It could be any other substance. And they are making it to look just like pills that are known, or that someone might, need to really take if they are ADD. And so when they take that medicine, when they're buying it, they can't tell the difference. So what you are purchasing is never really what you're purchasing. It's just like when Gail was showing the type of vapes. It looks just like something that would be, in their school supplies, or it looks like that watch. Everything that is made for drug use now is made to look like something ordinary that you would see every day in your kid's room. And whether it's lipstick, whether it's a sunscreen container that's hollow that holds a bunch of pills or liquor, if it's a flask, whether it is a pink highlighter, but you open it up and it's really a pipe. There are so many things, and that's exactly how they're doing drugs with. And you can order it on the internet. You can order drugs that have, vapes that have marijuana, that have meth, that have all kinds of substances in them. So it's really important to just be on the lookout.
Thank you, Allison. I appreciate all of those comments. I think the last thing I just would like to leave parents with is one of the best weapons that you have in your arsenal is to talk to your kids. Don't assume that they have the correct information. They may not. Take every opportunity to talk. We tell parents all the time to talk early and to talk often. They're never too young to start hearing the message about making healthy choices. And, one of the things that we do here is to provide lots of information and resources for parents who want to talk to their kids. And, we would love to share some of those resources with people. If you want more information about any of these things, vaping or addiction, and how to talk to your young people about it with age appropriate kinds of materials, please reach out to us. I would love to share those with you because those conversations matter so much. And kids are listening. They may not act like they are. They may not tell you that they are, but they do. They hear what we say, and it matters.
I 100% agree.
Can
And
y'all put your website in the chat so that people can look for those resources and have access to you?
That would be great. Thank you.
we can do that. And I really want to thank Gail and Allison for giving your time tonight to do this. This has been extremely informational. And I think with the chats and the questions that we're getting, it shows that there's a tremendous amount of interest. And I think there's a lot of other topics along this same line, that we need to do these workshops on. So I look forward to future workshops. I want to thank Carrie for hosting us. And I also want to thank everybody who's been online with us. So thank you so much.
May I just say one more thing? It's very important that this substance abuse can create a lot of embarrassment and shame and guilt and fear. And it's just important that if you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, that there are sources and resources for help. And the worst thing that we can do is fold to that potential embarrassment or fear or what might people think. And that addiction get progressively worse. And so I just encourage anyone that might have any concern to please reach out in your community or in your area, or contact the drug ed counselor, or contact me, and I can help direct you to some assistance. But there are all kinds of sources of support for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys so much. Yes, Allison, that's a great segue to end our time together. There are, since this is a family support webinar series, there are family resources out there. In Birmingham, we have some parents of addicted loved ones meetings. There are Al-Anon meetings. There are private counselors, lots of resources. So please feel free to reach out to either one of our organizations. And depending on where you are, we will help you get connected, because it's so important as a family. If you think your adolescent or teen or young adult or even adult child is struggling with substance use, education and support are critical for you. So do not hesitate to reach out. So thank you again, ladies. We appreciate you sharing your time with us. And thank you for everybody that joined. Again, we will send out a copy of this video, a copy of the slides, and also we'll send out a link to a survey, because we like to always get your feedback. And we would love to hear from you on topics that you would like more information on. We're going to continue our series. Eventbrite, there's listing of the next webinars that are coming up, and we want to repeat this again next year. So let us know the topics and the things that you want discussed, and we'll make sure to keep the ball rolling forward. So thank you all very, very much. I hope you have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.